Okay, welcome everyone to today's Google Webmaster Central Office Hours Hangout. Today we're focusing on AMP, Accelerated Mobile Pages, and we have a group of Google experts on AMP joining us here to help answer any of the questions that might come up. So first off, we have Elena, who's joining us from Mountain View, I think. Emmerich, who's here in Zurich, which is kind of weird because we're like in the same room. And Tomo, who's joining us from London. So the general format that we have planned for today is first to kind of start off with some general questions about AMP that we've heard from people who've been implementing AMP, who've been working with AMP, trying things out. Then we'll go through the submitted questions through the Q&A app, and depending on how much time we have left and how many people jump in to join us here, we might have time for some general discussions and live questions and answers as well. So with that, let me hand off to Elena to kind of go through the common questions and answers that we've had so far.
Great. Thanks so much, John. I just wanted to say before we get started, we know we probably have a fairly wide audience here with us today. Maybe some of you are not so familiar with AMP. Maybe some of you are but haven't started building AMP pages for your site. Maybe some of you already have or are in the process of building AMP pages. We're going to assume for the purpose of this conversation that everyone has a basic familiarity with AMP. However, that said, all questions are welcome, no matter how general in the Q&A, and we're really excited to answer your questions at the end. So with that, I'm going to get started. I'm just going to pretend like I am building AMP pages for my website, and my colleagues, and I have questions, and my colleagues are going to answer the questions, and these are some of the most common questions that we see or are challenges that people have in the forum. So with that, I have amplified my pages, but when validating them using the development tool, I get errors, and I'm not really sure how to fix them. So what are the resources that are available to me for fixing these errors?
Cool. Okay. So for those of you that aren't familiar with what the validator tool is, this is when you go onto one of your amplified pages and you open up the Chrome developer tools after putting on hash development =1 onto your AMP page, and this will basically run the validator in the background so that you can see if there's any AMP errors on your specific page, and that will kind of give you a good idea of what those errors are. Another way you kind of might see some of the errors that are also kind of shown on the validator tool is in Search Console itself. On the search appearances page for accelerated mobile pages, you'll be able to see some of the validation errors that your pages are running up against. But we very recently, I think it was earlier this week, we announced on the AMP HTML blog that we've just recently launched an AMP Validator Chrome extension, which is absolutely awesome. So if you're running into issues with validation errors, I would definitely recommend checking out the Chrome extension, as it kind of gives you the exact lines in your AMP pages where there's errors, and give you links, direct links to the resources that we have available to help you kind of troubleshoot those. So what the AMP Validator will link to through the Chrome extension is ampproject.org, which is our kind of like major repository for kind of troubleshooting AMP HTML issues, and that will give you a good idea of how to overcome some of those validation issues you might be seeing.
Thank you. Next, how can I make sure that my pages are going to be discovered by Google and by other search engines?
Cool. Okay, Emmerich, you look like you wanted to say something actually.
Thanks, this one. So first, check your AMP HTML page linking. Make sure you've got a link from your canonical page, so your main page, to the AMP page, rel equal AMP HTML. Make sure that in your AMP page you also have a canonical link back. When you have that, verify as well your robot.txt file, making sure you're not blocking Google bots, that you're not showing different version of the page on your users. So all the users asking for the AMP page should see the same AMP page. And Again, as we explained a bit in the first question, check for errors. Check for AMP HTML errors with extension, and also check your structured data via the structured data testing tools that you can easily find on the web by Googling for it. If you have proper structured data, proper AMP HTML, and proper discoverability, so page linking and not blocking via robot.txt, your page should be discoverable, and then if there are news pages also available for example, the news AMP carousel. Again, go in your search console. You will see in the search console the number of pages that have been found that are valid and the number that have problems, and a bit more details about the problems.
Thank you. Another question I have is, I've already built my AMP pages. When I validate my pages using the development tool, it checks out. My pages are properly amped. When I also validate my structured data using the structured data validation tool, it checks out there as well. But when I go to Search Console, I'm seeing errors in the Search Console. So why might that be happening?
So, John, do you want to answer this one, or would you like me to dive into it?
Go for it.
Okay. So there's kind of two issues that you run up against when you've resolved all of kind of the errors for your AMP pages, be it structured data or AMP HTML validation errors themselves. The first is that there's kind of propagation delays between Search Console seeing that you've resolved the structured data or AMP HTML errors on the page, and that can take a few days to kind of be updated, and it can take up to a week. So that's kind of the first thing to bear in mind. The second part of it is kind of how often we will crawl a specific URL of your page. So some of the pages might be crawled kind of every couple of minutes, others might be crawled every few months. So depending on the crawl rate and then the propagation delays, you can expect the errors to kind of reduce over time. So if everything is fixed from a validation perspective and structured data perspective, then you should be good to be eligible to show in the top stories carousel with your AMP pages.
I just want to chime in an additional point there is that Search Console is looking at eligibility for the top stories carousel in particular, which right now are pages that are eligible are articles, blog posts, and videos. So, if you have a page that is amped but not yet eligible to show in the top stories carousel, it will be reported as an error in the Search Console. And correct me if I'm wrong there, Emmerich and Tom.
No, you're right.
Okay. Another question I have is, I've amped my pages and they've been indexed by Google without errors, but I'm not seeing my pages in the top stories carousel. How come?
Will I take another stab at that one? Okay. So it can take a little bit of time for us to kind of get a better understanding of the query and your AMP HTML page. So after we've kind of learned that it could be relevant to show your particular page for a particular query, it could start showing in the carousel over time. But certainly, I wouldn't expect that necessarily straight away your AMP page is going to show up. But assuming, it's also kind of worth to note that assuming that even if you do have a valid AMP HTML page with valid structured data for the top stories carousel, we wouldn't guarantee that a carousel will always show, or that any specific pages will be present within it. I guess kind of it's really important to remember that AMP is really new to kind of Google search and Google properties. So over time, I expect that we'll see things change.
Got it. So at this time, what kinds of pages or what kinds what kinds of sites is AMP most suited for?
So I might take this one. So let's go back in time and talk about why AMP. So AMP idea is to make the mobile web faster. We had to start somewhere, and we wanted an open source project. And after discussing, the simplest way was to start by improving a bit the static content, meaning also news articles and things like are not changing every day. So AMP has been released with all the features needed to make static content much, much faster. Many things will come in the future to be able to do non-static content. It's already possible to dynamically load related content, for example, with AMP list. So you can load via JSON some more content, and so on and so on. So things are coming to make it a bit less static. You have menus that came very recently. If you go in roadmap, you'll see that there's forms that are coming. They're currently under experimentals. So things are coming to be a bit less static. But right now, AMP is for static pages, mainly for mobile, but not only. If you look at the source code of the ampproject.org website, which is, you can look at it from your browser, from your tablet, or from your mobile phone, it's an AMP page. So they're working on all the platforms, on all the browsers, not only for mobile, but static content for mobile it's what we're targeting with AMP.
Okay. What kind of structured data do I need to show up in the top stories carousel right now? I know we touched on this earlier, but maybe we can review.
Yeah, I guess to kind of summarize what we mentioned earlier, there's a couple of structured data types that we like to see for the top stories carousel, and that's article, news article, blog posting, video object, and I guess kind of as soon as we start showing the recipe cards, then recipe markup too.
Perfect. Do I need structured data on my AMP pages?
So I guess going to Emmeric's previous point, that if you want to be eligible to show in kind of rich cards or the top stories carousel for AMP, then structured data is required to tell us that you want to be able to show on those. But in terms of valid AMP HTML, then you don't necessarily need to have structured data at all. It's not a requirement of AMP HTML to have structured data.
Yeah. Okay. It might be good to mention as well that you may need different types of structured data to show up in other non-Google platforms. And then what are the differences between mobile sites versus canonical pages versus AMPs?
So I can go for this one. So canonical is usually your main desktop version. Then you might have another version which is a mobile site. Mobile site might be responsive, meaning also working well on the desktop, on a large screen, or not. It really depends the way you implemented it. Could be faster or not. It also depends on your implementation. So it's a different version of the same page. AMP is a third version also of that. AMP could be considered mobile friendly, as I said, but works as well. Could work as well as your canonical page. AMP is using a stripped-down version of HTML5, while usually your canonical website or your mobile website is using all the JavaScript you want, all the CSS you want, and so on. There is some limitation on AMP, so you cannot use all the third-party plugins available. You have really to use what has been made compatible with AMP to make sure that overall it will be extremely fast. The idea is to be able to validate those code and then to cache it. To have the page really hosted very, very close to your users and to load it very super fast. So main idea behind AMP is making it like a mobile web faster, while mobile web is make my page looking nice on the mobile, and canonical is just your standard version basically of your website.
Thanks, Emmer. Another question I have is, so I installed a plugin to automatically build out AMP pages for my website, and I did that, and everything seemed to be going fine, but now I'm seeing errors in the Search Console. So why might I be seeing those errors?
So first thing I would say is make sure to use the latest version of the plugin. Maybe the version of the plugin has been fixed and you're using an old version. If it's the case, use the tools, generic tools to test AMP pages. Use a Chrome extension, use the structured data testing tool, and find out what's going on. Have a look at the forum of this extension of this CMS and ask questions. This community will be the place usually where you get all the questions you need and maybe opening a burger and follow up and get support.
Okay. And my last question is, how do I go about installing a component on my amps? Whatever component, take sidebar component, accordion component, ads component. Maybe you can just talk about this process.
So by default on AMP, you've got some core extensions. So some of the things that are possible to do out of the box, like for example, AMP images. It's not HTML images, but it's a bit modified, so with a few extra things. So there's core component available by default and some extra components. If you go in the GitHub or in ampproject.org, you will have the entire list of all the available components. Could be to add videos, could be to add ads, carousel. I mean, there's a lot of them. The first thing I would do is to check if the extension is on production or if it's still experimental. Experimental means it's a first release of the extension. It's there for developers to try it out, to open bugs and check if everything's working well, but it won't be valid for production. You should not use it for your website at the moment. It's mainly for testing. To add a new component, new extension in your AMP page is extremely easy. The first thing you have to do is to load the JavaScript for this component within your header of your page in your AMP HTML, in your HTML5 basically. It will be loaded asynchronously. It won't block your page, so and that's a great thing behind AMP, is that it will not really slow down your page adding any more of those. Then inside your body, you can use this one. If you're using a menu, it should be the first one at the top. Well, just under the body. If it's AMP ads, you can place it wherever you want. If it's a carousel, you can customize it depending on the way you want it to be interactive. Do you want some buttons on it and so on and so on? But just have a look at the documentation. There is examples. One website you have to know is ampbyexample.com. It gives you code snippets and visualize. I mean, live you will see what it looks like. So you have many examples of configuration for each one of those extensions. Have a look. It's extremely well documented, very simple to use, very good to know.
The other thing that I'd say, as well as what Emmerich has mentioned, is that the AMP project is open source. So if there's components that don't quite fit your use case for whatever reason, or if there's new components that you would like to see, then the AMP project engineers want to hear about it. So head over to GitHub and file an issue so that they can start looking into how a specific component might work for your use case, or if new components are needed.
And if you cannot find a component, there is AMP iframes that exists that might also help you, like as a temporary solution to do things in your page. It won't really slow down your page. Just make sure that what you're loading in the iframe will be fast enough, because this AMP iframe will be loaded asynchronously, so content might come later. But that might be also a nice place to look at if you cannot find your component.
Great, thank you so much, Emmerich and Tomo. That wraps up all of my questions. So now I'm going to hand the floor back to John to open it up to Q&A.
All right, so there are a bunch of questions that were submitted. We can go through those, but maybe since there are a couple of you who joined here live, is there anything on your mind before we go through the rest of the questions?
If I may speak, my name is Colin. Hi, from Geschenke.de, online shop for gifts. I actually submitted a question which is not related to AMP. I must excuse myself. I didn't know that this is completely just around AMP. So shall I just maybe ask the question in another hangout then?
Yeah, that's probably best. So I actually have a German hangout tomorrow. If you speak German.
I saw that I won't be available tomorrow, but then probably I will join next week. I just wanted to check that out.
Okay, great.
Sorry for placing a wrong question here.
No problem. Okay, otherwise, let me start at the top. And I copied most of the questions that were in the comments as well into the list so that we should have those. Some of these probably have been answered already. What kind of pages is the use of AMP recommended?
So I'll take this one. So all the pages that are static. News for sure, but also we talked a bit about recipes and so on. AMP make it faster, or try to make it faster. If you can think about any static content you want to load fast on a mobile page, I mean, you might want to use AMP for it.
Okay, and the most important question for the SEOs and the audience, does AMP affect SEO? Is AMP a ranking factor?
So AMP is not a ranking factor. Speed is a ranking factor, used for ranking, but AMP is the format itself is not. So it should not change your ranking.
Okay, what a bummer. But you can still implement AMP. It's obviously great for your users, and if you make your users happier, then they're more likely to recommend your site. So that's an indirect factor. Would you recommend implementing AMP on all web pages for a site that mostly has recipes on it, or just the recipe pages?
So I think there is a few features that are not yet available to make a full site using AMP. And I mentioned forms, for example, but there's a few others. So if you can do all the features you need with AMP, feel free to do it. Like ampproject.org is a good example, right? It's static content. There is many things done with AMP. But if you need live lists, if you need scoring cards, I mean, there's many things right now that might be difficult to do with AMP, and you might want to not do your entire site with AMP right now.
So I guess just to add to that, answer my point before, is if there are kind of features that are kind of causing you not to implement AMP for whatever reason, then do head over to GitHub and let us know about it. We want to hear about the use cases and how you want to use and amplify your pages. So let us know on GitHub.
And I also would chime in here that I think the goal of the project is to be able to provide enough components that people could amplify their entire site. It's just that starting off with it makes the most sense for the leaf pages.
Can I ask a quick question, if you don't mind? Hi, sorry, I've not got my camera on because I've not got my makeup on, so apologies there. E-commerce, is that ever going to be amplified, or is it just not going to work? Or is it that, are you at the point where you're just trying to keep scope limited, and then eventually you may even, investigate the likes of e-commerce functionality or e-commerce pages? Because obviously there's a huge amount of e-commerce sites out there that maybe are less interested in AMP because it kind of at this stage doesn't affect their main commercial goals as such.
So as Tom said, AMP is an open project. So it really depends on what people are asking for and what people need. For e-commerce, obviously you need forms, for example. It's not yet possible to do it. So as soon as those new features will arrive, then e-commerce website might be interested to look at it and implement AMP. So it's a bit early for e-commerce, but I'm sure it's going to happen in the future.
Another thing I think to keep in mind is a lot of websites have different types of content. So even an e-commerce site might have static content, kind of informational content. It might have news articles that could be newsworthy articles that could show up in the news section too. So it's not that you have to convert the whole site to AMP. It's okay to take individual parts and say, well, I want this to be shown in AMP because Google currently shows that in search results as AMP as well.
I kind of get that. That ultimately you're trying to help people throughout the whole customer journey, but it was just really that, the question really was just wondering whether it's ever a potential possibility or if it just won't work ever with AMP. Or...
I can't speak for the AMP project, but I know e-commerce is a big priority because there are a lot of e-commerce sites out there, and there are a lot of really slow e-commerce sites out there. So if we can help to speed that up, I think that would be a good thing. I have no idea what the specific plans would be there, though.
Sure.
Yeah, John, I am also from e-commerce website, and the biggest problem that we are facing is even I am aware of AMP and want to move to AMP, but by now Google has not suggested it. And the biggest problem that I am seeing right now is JavaScript. We are using JavaScript in our mobile pages, and AMP restricts them. So we, however, as a e-commerce website, want to move to AMP, but by now we are not able to move to. So even I am aware when is the right time, and we should be prepared to move to. And also one more thing is, at least I am thinking it should not happen that AMP becomes a ranking factor, and we are not ready, so our ranking just goes down.
Okay. I don't know if one of you wanted to say something. I think in general, JavaScript is going to be a challenge. So using it in the iframe, that might be one option, but I don't see it happening that you can run random JavaScript on AMP pages, because that's kind of the model there, that random JavaScript is kind of sandboxed and kept out of the normal pages. So I don't really see that happening. With regards to it suddenly becoming a ranking factor and you're not ready, keep in mind everyone else is in the same boat. So if we were to say that it would be a ranking factor, which personally I don't see happening anytime soon, then it would be like all of the sites that are in the same niche have the same difficulties as you would have. So it's not the case that we would suddenly be showing news websites for queries where people are searching for products that they want to buy, because that would be a bad experience. We really need to make sure that what we provide in search is relevant to users and relevant to those queries, and not just something artificial based on what technology we think makes sense today.
Just to add a little something, so John is totally right. JavaScript, it's not going to happen soon that's going to be open to any JavaScript, just because it's extremely easy to break the speed of a page by just like reading things on the page or writing other things on the page. And the main AMP project is try to keep things working together and making sure they're not breaking other pieces of the code, other parts of the code. But I would look at the feature side. Why do you need JavaScript? Is there some specific features you might be interested to do that is not yet on AMP? If so, then just go in GitHub, open an issue, ask for it, and then it's gonna go in the roadmap. If a lot of people are asking for these features because it's really critical for your business, then like it's an open source community, right? Even you can add some code if you want and push some code, and people will look at it and release a new component to solve this need. So I would say just break it down to features, go in GitHub, have a look if something exists. If not, open an issue and ask for it.
So it's a challenge then with the likes of Bootstrap and those kind of frameworks, because obviously they are fairly reliant on JavaScript. So that's a challenge then, isn't it, really? If people have kind of moved across to like a responsive framework like Bootstrap, that's going to probably be fairly problematic for people in the short term, isn't it?
Yes, but keep in mind that AMP by default is made to be like adaptable on multiple devices. So is there a need to use Bootstrap at the same time as AMP, while AMP is already responsive? You know, there's maybe some overlap in those two.
Right. Okay. Great. Thank you.
All right, another question about the future plans. We didn't bring a crystal ball, so I can't promise everything. What are the plans to roll out to other countries beyond the existing 14? I noticed a lot of international AMP office hours hangouts and was wondering if this was a sign.
I can take this one, or I guess Tom might add some other things. So the idea is we want to serve good content to users rated on their queries. So we're going to definitely launch in new countries. We don't have any roadmap to be honest. We're looking at the coverage for each country. And as soon as we have a good coverage, meaning enough people publishing content in this country in local languages, and like if you're looking for content and you want to see nice carousel, we're looking at it. That makes sense right now with available content to show carousel or not. As soon as we have a good coverage, we will launch an AMP in the country. So if you want AMP in your country, the best way is implement it. We will see that, and as soon as we have enough, we will launch it.
Okay, e-commerce and dynamic pages are not mentioned as one of the content forms. I think we talked about this a bit. Which page is presented within the mobile search results, the AMP page or the responsive page? So I think the question is which one would we link to from the search results?
So I guess if the page is displaying in a top stories carousel, then it will be the AMP version. But correct me if I'm wrong, if it's just a kind of a blue link web result, then it will be the mobile site or the responsive site that we link to currently.
All right. Can I use AMP for a video website?
Yes, definitely. If it depends what you talk about video website. Is it a blog that is showing very like videos and things? But definitely there is a lot of components to display videos on AMP. Have a look. It could be just a player, but it could also be like a third party. There is many of them, so definitely if you have a website showing videos, you might be interested to amplify it.
Okay, I'm not quite sure what's meant with this question, but maybe you see it. Going forward with structured data, is that now just implemented within the AMP code? Meaning, can I use AMP code and it will be validated for AMP, structured data markup, etc., all in one code? So I think it kind of goes into the direction of, can I use AMP for my whole website kind of as a normal format instead of the HTML with the structured data?
So I'm not really sure about the question. If that's the question, yes, AMP is basically HTML5, so it's working together. Maybe also the question could be, I'm using a plugin in the CMS, and it has been supported by this plugin, so it's generating the structured data for me. Is it okay? Yes, definitely. I mean, it's two different things. AMP HTML is the code. Structured data is informing Google, but also others, what's in your page. Is my page about a video, or is my page about a music content? Is my page a recipe? So it's two different things. They're working well together. They're going to be in the same HTML document, but then you can do it depending on the way you're generating your code. But yeah, it should work together for sure.
Okay. If that wasn't clear, if you had a different question, I'd recommend going to the Webmaster Help Forum and posting there with a little bit more details. Tomo and Elena, for example, are pretty active in the forums, keeping up with the AMP questions there. So if you have some more information about what specifically you were asking, I'm sure they'll be happy to help answer that there. Here's a question about different types of content. Would AMP be useful for forum type sites where the page content is updated frequently?
So I would say no. It's not. Right now, it's mainly for static pages, right? If you have something that is like a live blog, something like that, there's an extension, a component that is coming soon. So that might solve your problem, and then the answer will be yes. But right now, as a forum, I don't think AMP is ready for that.
Okay. Here's a question that I think kind of falls into the similar group. I have 140,000 indexed AMP pages, but no AMP traffic. Is schema.org/discussion forum posting supported? And will Google support my AMP pages?
So I guess kind of right now, we covered the structured data types that are required for the top stories carousel. So currently, for that structured data type, you wouldn't necessarily see your page showing in the top stories carousel. In terms of plans to support it in the future, as Emmerich said, kind of who knows.
All right. So here's a question that I'm sure we could discuss for hours. Would you advise small business websites to invest in AMP or responsive design?
AMP is responsive by design, so it might solve your problems. Maybe you don't have the features you need on AMP right now. So look at what is needed. Maybe AMP can help you. So the goal behind AMP, again, is to have extremely fast pages. So if you want to have fast pages easily, AMP might be the way to go. If you need some specific features, nice animations, things like that, AMP won't be what you're looking for the moment. So it really depends on your need, on your business. But it's going to be easier to have a fast page with AMP than if you're doing everything yourself. So maybe you can consider that if you're an SME. Maybe you have less resources to invest on focusing on having a fast page. I used to be a web developer, and I focused on features. I wanted to have a very nice looking website with all the features I needed for my business, and speed wasn't my priority. AMP is bringing the speed. You don't have to worry about it. You just have to think about those features.
I think one aspect that I always like to add as well is, depending on the setup you have, getting AMP might be really easy. So if you're using a common CMS like WordPress, then even as a small business, that's something that you can probably set up fairly easily. You can definitely get help in creating nice templates for that. And getting AMP on top of your existing website that you have there is sometimes as easy as just installing a plugin and double-checking the pages that they come out correctly. So sometimes it's not so much a matter of should I invest here or there. You can probably have both without that much of an additional overhead. Okay, here's one about HTTP, HTTPS. Presumably, the requirement for any ads to be loaded over HTTPS means the AMP page from which it's being served also needs to be HTTPS. Does this mean that effectively HTTPS is essential for AMP pages?
So it's a very, very good question. So valid AMP pages will be cached. The cache will serve those AMP pages through HTTPS. So all the content in those pages should also be served through HTTPS, and ads are part of them. And that's why you need to make sure that your ads have been served by HTTPS. If you want your website to be hosted on HTTP, it's fine. There's like no requirement for that. But if the page are cached and served by the cache, make sure that everything loaded in this page, including AMP iframes, videos, all those things, could be served through HTTPS. Because if not, you will have a nice security warning.
All right. Wow, we made it through the questions here. Is there anything else on your mind? The folks who are in the Hangout, what other AMP-related questions have you run across or have been bothering you or that you've been wondering about?
Can I ask one more quick question, please? CSS. So I've been reading lots and lots of different pages about AMP and whatnot, and I'm just a little bit unclear on the restrictions on CSS, because some of them say CSS needs to be in line. Some of them say CSS must not be in line. So just to clarify, which one is it? In line or not in line?
So in line, and there's the limit in terms of size. It was 40 kilobytes. So much, much more than what I hope you need, but it should definitely be inline. And there is very simple reason for that. When you're loading the HTML page, so it's a GET request, you're going to get the page. You don't want to do another request to get the CSS. You want to have everything you need to start rendering the page as soon as possible. So you want like the CSS to be inline to reduce the number of calls your browser will do on the server side.
Okay, because I think what's starting to happen is people are starting to do blog posts about these things, and a little bit of lost in translation. So definitely I was seeing some that said, no, you can't have inline. So I suppose it's going to happen as people write about this thing. Thank you. Cheers, thanks.
It will be reported as an error if you're validating your AMP page, and if you don't have it in line, that would be a nice error message, so you won't have a valid AMP format anyway.
Can I just ask one more very quick thing as well? So do you know that there's currently an issue with I implemented Cloudflare on my site. I was testing AMP on a small section of a website and managed to get my errors down to like 6. So that was wonderful. And then all of a sudden I implemented Cloudflare, and obviously the flexible SSL came in, so that was great. But then AMP just totally broke. All the errors are still there. When you look on Cloudflare, the Cloudflare project in the forums, they are aware of this. They know that there is a conflict between AMP and Cloudflare. I don't know what your thoughts on that are, whether you're aware of it or.
So there is also an open discussion issue in the GitHub. It's the AMP project GitHub, 2380. You might have a look at this thread as well. It's like quite long. So yeah, it's a well-known problem, and people are looking at it.
That's the one, actually. Sorry, that it is. I wasn't sure whether I'd seen it on the Cloudflare forums or whether I'd seen it on AMP. So yeah, it's really quite active, as you said. So hopefully they'll get that resolved quite soon.
Hopefully, yes. Many people are using Cloudflare, so it's a non-problem.
Well, thank you. Cheers.
Yeah,
Okay.
Can I ask one question?
Yeah, sure, go for it.
Yeah, John. If my page is coming in AMP carousel, and due to some personal reason or technical reason I need to de-index it or to remove this from search carousel, what should be the way that I can use to remove my page from carousel? It is okay that I will get it published, but in case I want to remove this from carousel.
So there is an API documentation actually that you can look at for AMP. So there is a way to refresh the page if the problem is that your page is obsolete, you had to change something and you want it to be quickly recalled. Also, you can like robots.txt. There's all the standard ways of removing a page from Google search engine that are also valid for AMP.
So how fast would that update in the cache? Is that something that would take like a couple of days, or?
So if you ping the cache, it should be like a matter of minutes actually. So it should be very, very fast.
Okay, one more question got submitted. How does this work with Google Analytics? If the AMP page is served from Google CDN, how will the content publisher know how many views it received?
So the idea behind analytics is you monitor it once and then you report it to whoever you want. There is in the mproject.org a documentation explaining how the tracking between between the cache and the official domain name has been done. So there is a few tricky use case, let's say, that had to be supported, including looking at the cookies and all those things. So there is a user ID that is generated and followed up. I will redirect you to have a look at this documentation in the GitHub and in mproject.org. It's going to be much more precise at what I'm going to say, and also depends on the implementation on the analytics systems. So have a look over there. It's going to be way easier.
One thing I just like to add there is you also have this information in Search Console. It's slightly different because of the way it's tracked differently, but you have the clicks and impression information per query in Search Console for the AMP pages specifically. So you can filter down for everything that was shown in AMP, look at the queries that were showing these AMP pages, which pages were shown, how many times did people actually click to see the full page in the viewer as well. So that's something where even if you don't have the analytics implemented, you should be able to see some general information on how your pages are doing in Google when they're shown as AMP pages. Okay. Any last questions from you here in the audience?
Can I just ask one final question?
Sure.
It's also about analytics, if that's all right. I just want to clarify, the analytics element of it, is that totally open source as well, so that you could use any number of analytics packages whatsoever? So there's no restriction, it's not just you must use Google Analytics and that's it.
No, that would be a shame, right? So no, it's fully open source. You can have a look at it. There is a list of already configured analytics systems, Adobe and so on and so on. So you might use those ones, but maybe you're using one you're hosting on your own system that is an open source analytics systems. Then you can write down the configuration. Configuration is a small JSON config, and basically what you're gonna define is, oh, I'm interested to see when people are scrolling on my page. I'm interested to see on this action and that action, and please report this information to that server. That server should be HTTPS, because could be served through HTTPS, but you're totally free to configure it the way you want. And if you want to report to multiple analytics systems, you just add multiple tags, let's say one for Adobe and one for your own systems, and you're going to measure only this data once, so it's not going to slow down the page, but report it twice or more if you want to have more analytics systems.
Well, thank you. And can I just ask one final question, please? It's about in analytics in Google Search Console. So I saw something the other week that talks about how you could filter and to see if you had any traffic through AMP. Not that I was expecting any, to be fair, but obviously that AMP drop down, it doesn't show, does it, unless you're actually triggering any queries. So it doesn't even say like no data, it just is not there at all. Is that right?
Yes, that's correct. If we don't have anything specific to kind of filter down for, then we don't show that drop down.
Okay. Is there any chance that they'll maybe show the drop down, just say no data, just to avoid any sort of, for the avoidance of doubt, in case you think, oh well, why is that not there? Or just, I know that the other day I was thinking, oh gosh, maybe something's wrong with my Search Console, and then I went and rooted around and found that you'd said that it's not going to show.
Yeah, that's really good feedback. You're not the first person to mention that, so I really need to make sure that I bring that back to the team. I imagine as we add more search features to that drop-down, it'll be more common that it's shown for most websites, but having some kind of a placeholder there probably makes it easier for you to kind of understand, oh, it should be here, but actually there's no data, so I can't actually use it.
Because we have that in many other things, don't we? So, if there's no structured data or whatever, it says we didn't find this, or just, I know that I was confused, that was all. So.
Yeah, good feedback.
Okay, thank you. Right, great, thanks. That's my last question, by the way, definitely. Feeling a bit like Columbo, so yeah, thank you.
No problem. We love answering questions, and we still have a bit of time left. Mihai, your microphone light is blinking.
Yeah, this is my new sign, and I want to ask a question. I actually asked you about this in the beta forums on AMP. Our publisher client has noticed a huge decrease in AMP index page, both in AMP index pages and in the errors they get. I don't know if you managed to look over that and tell me if there's anything happening, because the client didn't change anything to their website, so it's a bit odd.
We did look into that, and we couldn't really figure out what exactly was happening there, but we noticed that the curve went back up again, so we were like, well, in case this happens again, we need to figure out a way to find samples to figure out what actually was happening there. But from what I can see, the curve has been going up there again. I suspect some of you might get a slight shock because we're looking at the index counts there, and we noticed that for some reason we were over-reporting them in the AMP report. So at some point in the next couple of weeks, we'll probably need to adjust that back to what we think is the correct count. So you might see a drop in the number of indexed AMP pages there. But we'll put an annotation there. We'll do a quick post on Google+ so that people don't freak out too much, but just for your information.
Okay, thanks. So it's just basically a reporting error, nothing technical or on the actual results
I suspect it was something where we weren't indexing like all of the AMP pages there, but the nice thing about at least the current implementation of AMP is that it focuses on the in the news type content, where that's the content that's usually going to stay indexed anyway for a period of time like that. So if the really older articles drop out and the index count goes down, that's not something that you would even see reflected in search, because we wouldn't be showing those as newsworthy articles. So that's something where, at least in the current situation, it's less something I'd worry about and more something where when you actually see that fewer AMP pages are shown, and you can pull out queries or URLs and say, well, this page is new and it's never showing as AMP, then that's something that's a lot easier for us to dig in and say, okay, what happened with this specific URL during this time?
Okay, I'll keep you posted if I notice anything else.
All right, great. So maybe we can close things down here. It's been great having you all here. Thank you to the experts from Google who've kind of jumped in, answered a bunch of these questions. As I mentioned before, if you have more questions around AMP, make sure to visit our help forum where you can post your questions, get help by other webmasters that are kind of battling with the same problems you might be having or have looked at the same problem you've seen before. And of course, our Googlers are active there as well. Otherwise, we run these office hours hangouts every couple of weeks. So if they're general webmaster questions, general search questions, feel free to jump on into one of the future hangouts. So with that, I'd just like to say thank you again for everyone, and maybe we'll see you again in one of the future hangouts.
Thanks, John.
Thank
Thanks,
you.
everyone.
Yes, thanks all. Bye.
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 Bye.